My name is Paxton, and this is the Career Spotlight. Today, we are joined by Mr. Shaw, who is the principal at East Middle School in Aurora Public Schools. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, buddy.
Yeah, no worries. Let's just jump right into it. What do you do as the principal for East Middle School?
Everything. I'm responsible for the safety and security, first and foremost, in creating an environment that are conducive for students to be able to learn and reach their potential. So I put the systems in place. I'm responsible for the hiring. I'm responsible for the evaluating. I'm responsible for managing the budget. And I'm also tasked with making sure that district initiatives make it from the central admin office to the building.
That sounds like a really amazing job.
Yeah, it's busy, 115 staff members, 800 students, 8 to 900. Last couple of years, we've been around 915, 920. But with COVID and all of the things that have happened, some people have relocated. So our numbers are at about 800-ish. We're in the process of completing a $44 million building. We have a new build. That's another thing that I'm responsible for. It's a separate budget, but it's still a part of the job as the building leader. And that's going to be exciting because knowing that once we build a new building, we're going to have a lot more students.
Wow, that's a lot of jobs all incorporated into the one. Running your current school, building a new one, doing all of the hiring.
Yeah, it's busy, and that's, I think that's the part of my job that I truly enjoy is every day is never the same. I won't have the exact same situation or day of predictability that I'd have in a different setting. And that's something that I enjoy.
So because every day is different, do you need to be somewhat creative to find solutions to all the new stuff that comes up day to day?
I think it depends on the dynamics of your team and how your school is structured, right? So because my school is as big as it has been, I have a pretty big staff to support me from a perspective of office support, also from the perspective of assistant principals, deans, and counselors. And so we really do run an intentional model that's kind of distributing the leadership so other people can make decisions as needed. Because like we talked about earlier, it's difficult. It would be difficult for one person to manage everything by themselves every single day without burning themselves out. And so having a competent team that I can trust to go out and handle some of this has been a thing that's been very helpful for me. Now, whether or not that's something that people intentionally do, that part I don't know. I just know, like, my personality and just my leadership by nature, I truly believe in the team model where people understand what their role is, people understand what their job is, and I just remove the obstacles and barriers that are keeping people from doing it so they can be their best self.
Yeah. So a good set of people on your team is needed for this job.
Yes, absolutely.
What are some other personality traits that are good or required for this job?
I would find it hard to believe that you would be in this seat and not enjoy working with people. Like I said, any given day, prior to the pandemic and all of the restrictions, there were days I could meet with 20 people a day, and they're all different with different needs, different obstacles that they're having to need support from us to address, because it's usually how do we get the most out of their student, right? If it's a parent or a guardian that I'm meeting with, typically it's hey, how can we partner in getting the most out of our child. And so, prior to the pandemic, you really needed to be a people person. I think that's one of my struggles as COVID hit, is the interacting with humans on a regular basis was the thing that's changed, at least for me. And it's hard to not high five kids. It's hard to not hug kids. It's hard to not go out and play and do a lot of those things just because of all the health guidelines. But you definitely have to be a person that has a backbone. Just because of the nature of working with 100 and some odd staff members, and then the 800 students and their families, on top of all of the other things that come in, whether it's a business that wants to try to market and partner with you, you have to have a clear vision to know when to say no to good ideas, because lots of people are going to present lots of things that sound good in theory, but at the end of the day, you have to be able to detangle all of the things that aren't going to contribute to student success.
So you really need to have a vision and not only be able to stick to that vision, but remember the 10 million things that are needed for that vision for all of those meetings.
Absolutely. And you have to have the ability to kind of motivate. You have to motivate and inspire people to see something that doesn't exist yet. Even particularly for kids, right? Like, these kids are in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, and the workforce is going to look different 15 years from now, right? And so when a kid goes, whether they go finish high school, go to college, or finish high school, go to trade school, go in the military, wherever their path is, it's safe to say that the workforce is going to look different years from now. And so those are the things that we try to help support kids in seeing for themselves as they plan the next steps for their life. Because at the end of the day, my job is to expose them to things that they may have never seen to be possible.
What are some personalities that would not fit in so well with this job?
I think a person that's very rigid would potentially struggle, especially in the world that we're in now, with education changing based on health guidelines, based on just systems that people are having to put in place because of the pandemic. So people that are super rigid may have struggles sitting in this seat because of all the things that have changed. I mean, I've been on spring break this week, and you can see the CDC guidelines are already changing for certain things, right? 6 feet used to be the barometer for this is how far and this is how close you need to be. That's changing to 3 feet. So it changes the way people are planning things. Lots of things require the ability to be flexible, to be able to pivot based on the information that you get. And so I think if you're a rigid person, it might be something that's difficult. If you struggle to communicate and connect with people, that could potentially be a challenge, just because of all of the requirements and you always being the face of the school, right? So when I'm in my community, if I go to the Wendy's,
represent the school.
Yes, you are the school. And so when I'm at Walgreens, or if I'm at the grocery store that's right around the corner from my school, one of the things that I look for are people that are wearing East gear. And how are they conducting themselves when they're in public, because they represent us. And I have to be mindful of that as well, because I represent the school, my community, and the school district. And so you kind of have to be willing to be a champion, and you're the biggest advertisement for the district and the school. And so you kind of have to be willing to put yourself out there and just interact with people. I kind of see myself as the mayor of a small town, where everywhere I go, people know me. And so I have to always make sure that I'm representing well. I don't feel like I have to be something that I'm not, but you have this feeling that the camera is always on you, because there are people that are looking to you, right? Like, how do you respond when you send emails? How do you respond when people show up and they may not be having the behavior that's expected in the building around our culture? Those are the things that I have to address directly as the principal of our school, because the buck stops with me. Everything good that happens typically is a collaboration of a lot of people. The things that aren't going well are things that I have to be able to problem solve and find a way to course correct.
I feel like the principal's job is viewed as, oh, he or she just gets to sit in the big chair and everyone's doing everything for them. And it's so much more than that.
Absolutely. Like you have to train people and coach people to build their own skills and efficacy. And so I think that's one thing that my staff and the community understands is there's nothing that I ask people to do that I haven't done. Right? You'll see me shoveling, you'll see me picking up trash, you'll see me teaching class. Like there's not a thing that I would ask that I haven't done. And that's that the ownership always starts with me. And it's something that I have to model. And it's something that I have to teach other people to be able to do, because the school existed before I got there. The school's going to exist when I'm gone. Did I leave it in a better place prior to my leaving is the thing that I always think about. Whether I'm interacting with families, whether I'm interacting with kids, when I set expectations, whether it's me interacting with our staff, those are all the things that I think about trying to leaving the school in a better place is the thing that I find is my task, because the principals that came before me put systems and structures in place to set us up for the next thing. Now I've taken it, I put things in place to take us to the next level. The principal that's going to come after me is going to do the exact same thing. And so for me, I want to make sure that I'm leaving the school in the best conditions possible prior to my departure.
I've actually interviewed you before, and I know you've been a history teacher, then you were assistant principal, now you've gone all the way to be a principal. Which of those, if any, prerequisites do you think are needed or people should have if they're looking to be a principal?
Well, I mean, I find it hard. I mean, I think lots of people have different paths, right? And so I've sat in conferences and I've sat in seminars to talk to aspiring principals about the path, right? And so I didn't teach very long before I got into administration. Part of it is just my age, right? Like before I got into education older than most because of my profession prior to me getting into education. And so some of the skills and some of the things that I brought to the table from the perspective of a leader kind of sped my path up for me to become an administrator and a principal, right? I mean, I haven't been in education very long to be sitting in the seat that I'm sitting in. And so you can't become an administrator without being a teacher or in education in some capacity. Most places, you have to have been a teacher for 3 years in order to be able to become an assistant principal or a teacher leader or a dean or one of those things. And typically you have to do that for a couple of years before you have the opportunity to interview to become a principal. And so you really want to think about the rule of 3. You want to spend 3 years teaching before you become an administrator, 3 years as an administrator before you become a principal. And the process isn't much different to become an assistant superintendent and things of those natures, right? So like in my district, we have a apprenticeship for people that are aspiring to get into central admin. And this is only my 2nd year as a principal. And when I was talking to my boss, she was like, yeah, we're looking for people that have had 3 years of experience in the seat before they look at moving up to the district that you're in. And sometimes it depends on the need, right? If a person has the skill to do the job, sometimes people say, let's just go ahead and put this person in the spot because we know they can
I
do the job.
see. Yeah,
So it's
that
nothing that's
makes,
hard and fast. Yeah, like there's no hard and fast rule. Like you have to do this for this many years because if you go to another district, it'll look different.
yeah. So, completely switching topics. Overall, what would you say is a good reason to go into this career, and why might some people like it?
I read that when you sent that to me, Paxton, and I still wrestle with it because if you had asked me 10 years ago if I would have been a principal, I would have said absolutely not. But the thing that I learned as I went through my career as a coach and as a teacher, I started thinking about what I could do to expand the magnitude and the impact that I could have on a community. And this was the next thing, right? And so when I was a coach in Mississippi and when I was a coach in Colorado, the one thing that I thought about, I was going to be a head football coach for high school, and then I was going to be an athletic director. Then I moved back to Colorado, and I had a decision to make: did I want to be an athletic director or did I want to be a principal? And one of my mentors talked to me about the impact in creating a culture based on the person who's sitting in that seat. And the person sitting in that seat, obviously as a principal, ends up being me. I've been fortunate enough to work with probably the best principal in Boulder Valley as an assistant principal when I worked with Tracy Stagel, who's now an assistant superintendent in Thompson Valley. Um, Being able to work with her and watch her create a culture where the school was more like a family and a community, and it wasn't always the business stuff. We still managed the business stuff, but Tracy did a really good job of setting the stage for the school to be a place where kids wanted to come to learn to love learning. And it's something that has to be done intentionally. If you don't intentionally create that culture, it's not going to happen. And so whether it was the dance parties on Friday or the silly things that she was doing for kids to be able to see their principal show that you can be in a learning institution and have fun and be safe doing those things was the thing that resonated with me. And I said, my path is going to be principal, just because of the amount of people that you actually interact with on a regular basis. If you're hiring the teachers that can follow a vision, and if you can work with the district to make sure you get the resources that you need, that's going to be the thing that just it fosters all of those conditions that are needed to be able to thrive. And so the principal, like that role, is something I feel like you have to be called to do, or it's something that you have to really burn for. Like that, this really isn't a job that you just take for the sake of having a job. Like you have to really want to do this if you want to do it well. Now, there are some people that probably have the position just out of attrition, people leaving, and by default. But this was something that I intentionally sought after because of the impact that I could have. If I could change the trajectory of the kid's life by interacting with them one day to say, hey, this is something that you can be, or this is something that you can become, or you can do this. For a kid to hear it come from their principal, that means a lot for some kids. And I've had kids that have come back to visit me and say, you always told me that I could do it and I didn't believe it. And now you're right. Like I actually was able to achieve that thing. And so just like, I think the responsibility of the seat is the thing that gets me up in the morning. Because I can change a kid's life, and I can break a pattern. I can break a cycle of poverty. I can break a cycle of a lack of education, by creating conditions where a kid believes that they can be successful.
That's really cool. So you talked a bit about Miss Stagel, the awesome principal. What things from her, like the dance party and like all those super fun silly hats she used to wear, have you implemented in your own school?
Some of the same systems that we use at Aspen Creek. I mean, Aspen Creek was two schools within themselves because you had the elementary, then you had the middle school, and you had the combination of them both in the K-8. So you have to really create like intentional systems that are actually able to work. And so I was able to take a lot of that into my new role because there were systems that were in place that were functioning, but then there were some that needed to be tweaked and some that needed to be just discarded. And I talk to Ms. Stagel often just to say, hey, what do you think about that? Right? It's super important to make sure that you have mentors and people that have more experience than you, because that wisdom can keep you from making a mistake and it can help you become more efficient. So just a lot of the systems, particularly around multi-tiered systems of support, to try to catch those kids that are falling through cracks before they fall completely through them. That's a thing that we've been working on. Having the right curriculum in place, and that's instructional school stuff that people will probably go, I don't want to hear about Fontes and Pinnell or Lucy Calkins or any of those things. But like really making sure that the systems and the resources that we have in our school actually work for the community. Like that's a thing, and Ms. Stagel was really good about, here's the data and here are the numbers. What do you do next? Right? Because like lots of people like to sit in the world of theory. I like to sit in the world of implementation. And so I see something, this is what I see, now this is what I do. And Trey and the state did a really good job of helping me figure those things out to make the next steps.
Changing direction again, more specific to you, what is your favorite part or parts of your job?
When kids come back, I think that's really the best part of my job. I often tell kids, in middle school, you are half baked. So you've got a long way to go in your development as a young person. And if you understood all the things that adults were trying to get you to do, you wouldn't need us. And so like there's that need in that when we have that grapple and that wrestle, when students want to go one path and we want to help guide them. It's like once you get on the other side of the path, this field's going to open up and you can make all these choices, but you got to get through the path first. And so knowing that I can change the trajectory of a kid's life, and change generational poverty, break cycles of dysfunction, like that's a thing that like it really does hit me in my heart when I know that I can make a difference. And when a kid comes back and they say, you never gave up on me, Mr. Shaw, and now I'm going here, I'm doing this, and all of these things are happening because I finally figured it out. And that's really my job at the end of the day, is to help kids figure it out. And when they do come back and they're like, God, can I come talk to your kids to tell them to just trust you because you know what you're talking about? Like, like we've been in the kid business for a long time, and I say we being my staff and my team, and we want to do what's best for all kids, and that's the thing. Ms. Stagel used to always say this, and I brought this up to my staff often. We're going to do what's best for kids, not what's easiest for adults, because adults want to sometimes do the thing that's comfortable for them, not knowing that might create a negative impact on a student because something was easy for them. And so it's my job to kind of gently provide that pressure for adults to say, okay, I need to stretch myself out of my zone of comfort in order to help serve students better. So that's what makes my job worthwhile. Like when a kid comes back and they're like, thank you.
You changed my life.
Yes, or when a kid has when they become adult, now I have students that have their own families. And when students come back or kids that I've coached and they're like, Coach, I find myself quoting some of the things that you used to say to me when I was 16 years old, and like being able to pay that forward, right? Like it doesn't, like it'll always, like being able to replicate who you are for the right reasons is a thing. It just warms my heart to know that I impact people in a positive way.
That makes a lot of sense. All jobs have some ups and some downs. What are some not so fun parts of your job?
Hmm. You know, it's interesting. I think it kind of depends on your mentality, right? There's some people that are going to be followers. There's some people that are going to truly be leaders. And I think sometimes the bureaucracy and the politics can be a thing that can be frustrating. But I think as a leader, one of the things that we always have to reflect on is what do we actually control and what are we doing about it? The things that tend to be a rub in my position as a principal, all I do is control those things, right? So with me getting my doctorate, knowing how there can be educational reform as things can be done differently or better, I think about my seat and where I'm at like right now. I'm not in a seat or a position to be able to change anything above me. So those are the things that don't kind of stick out as my thorn. What I tend to focus on are the things that I know that I can control, right? Like that's the thing I
Yeah.
think that makes my job that much easier. There are some people that spin in that though. You know, they're worried about district initiatives. They're worried about what happens with the state budget. They're worried about what happens with the federal budget. Like all of these things impact public schools positively or negatively, depending on where you're at in the situation. But for me, the negative parts of my job we go back to that growth mindset that we talked about earlier. I look at those as opportunities for growth or an opportunity to reinvent something that doesn't work. Because if it doesn't work for me, like in our building, I think that's the one thing that people would say is if it doesn't work and we have data that shows it, we stop it. Stop doing things that don't work. It's okay, right? You don't have to keep repeating this pattern and staying in this cycle of dysfunction. So make it. There has to be action, right? And so, like, I can't think of too many things. Part of it is my mindset. Um, and part of it is my profession prior to, right? So thinking about this, Paxton, you know, playing professional football for 8 years, it didn't take much to get cut from a team, traded from a team. Any of those things can happen that fast, right? And understanding the nature of the business, I learned not to take things personal. And then I get into the world of education, where things are a lot different than professional sports. And so my mindset is a little bit different because I don't see somebody training or trying out to be the principal for my school in front of me. Where when I was a football player, people were fighting for my job in front of me every day, right? And so I kind of have a different mindset in the world of how do I function in a space with opposition, right? Like I know that I can go around it, I can go through it, I can stop. There's lots of different options. But I really don't let obstacles and barriers be a thing that keeps me from showing up every day.
So basically, there are some not so great parts of the job, but you just have to get over them and push ahead and do the job as good as you can.
Well, there's every profession is gonna have a rub of some sort, you know? I mean, but the question is, how soon can you figure out what the landmines are so you can learn how to navigate them? And like that's been my leaving one district to another. So I've been in three separate districts as an educator, two in the state of Colorado, one in the state of Mississippi, and they're not much different. There's always going to be a challenge of some sort. The challenge is just going to look different, you know? And so for me, knowing that, I think if you go in and you bury your head in the sand thinking that there aren't going to be any challenges, you're living in the world of delusion. And I'd rather not live in the world of delusion. I'm actually looking for what could be a potential landmine that I need to pay attention to. And so just
Yeah.
having that awareness and walking in, and it wouldn't matter right now if I stepped off of this chair and said, I'm not the principal anymore, I'm going to go get a job at Microsoft. Okay. If I went to Microsoft, there's still going to be challenges, right? And I think when people hide or run from those things or pretend they don't exist, they put themselves at a disadvantage. And so for me, like all of the things sometimes that may seem like they make my job difficult gives me an opportunity to say, okay, what system can I put in place so that thing doesn't impact my community? And then I put the system in place.
So you kind of need to look at the things that are influencing your job, either good or bad, and be able to put systems in place so that you can either, if they're good, put it out to your community, or if it's bad, remove it from the
Yes.
big picture.
Exactly. And as a conceptual thinker, that's what I'm like. I've been a conceptual thinker my whole life. And so, like, I've always looked for the next thing. So what's the thing that happens next? And why did that next thing show up? And so, like, that's just my silly way of thinking. And that's the fun part, because you're working with so many different people and there's so many moving parts, and just like watching those parts and knowing that, you know, if a person's not doing their job as well as they could be, it's an opportunity for me to coach them and make them better at it, or give them an opportunity to find something else to do. Because some people end up in places like we talked about earlier, like there's some principals that have this seat because other people didn't want the job, something happened and they just got moved into a position quick. All of those things happen so fast. But this is a place that I want to be, and so I look for those challenges. And like I say, when I put it in perspective, coming from a profession where it was very unpredictable as far as your future, this is a walk in the meadow. and I truly enjoy it. You know, I mean, I truly enjoy every part of the challenge that comes with my job, because of all of the great things that come as a result of working that out.
Yeah. Moving on to another question. What things out of your control affect your job? Like the economy, the weather, pandemics even.
Yeah, that's a reality. And I think that's probably, nobody could see COVID coming. But what we do know is COVID doesn't exist in just schools. And so when I would have conversations with people, maybe we go back to the locus of control. If I was to leave the world of education and go to work for Amazon or work for any person anywhere else, would the pandemic still exist? Yes, it would. So that's a thing that you don't even consider as a thing that bears weight on your job, because every person is going through it. It's no different than the economy. You know, I mean, when the economy has its ups and its downs, you know, I think as a building leader, the one thing that we have to do, or we should be doing, is we should be trying to see what's around the corner before we get to the corner. And when you're able to kind of try to put things in place to say, well, based on what I see right now, this, and this are likely to happen. This is going to happen, and that could never happen. So as you build your plan, you build it around some of the possibilities and some of the likelihoods of things. And I think that that's, once again, that's a fun part of my job sometimes is.
So you have to be able to say, this affects my job. I'm going to put this in place, more of plans and structures, so that it affects my job the least amount possible.
Foresight. Yes, you have to have foresight, and I mean, and I know, like, with my staff, and even when I talk with people often, I do make a lot of sports analogies because sports was a big part of my life before I got into education. And one of the things I used to always do as a coach is I would try to call plays defensively that would set us up based on what I'm predicting is going to happen. Right? Now, I don't know how many people are football fans here, but let's just pretend that this is the last play before the half. There's certain things that people are going to try to do if they really want to try to score. Defensively, you can call plays and be strategic in how you force a person's hand to put your kids in the best position to be able to be successful. And that's, but that's that foresight piece that a leader has to have. You can't just walk and just things just magically happen. You have to go, okay, well, 6 months down the road, this is what it's going to look like. A year from now, this is what it's going to look like. 3 years from now, this is what it's going to look like. And 5 years from now, this is what it's going to look like. Like, you have to be able to look that far down the road to be able to plan. And even in my situation, when I met with my boss last spring, when we were going over some of these situations with COVID, we were already starting to make some changes and modifications to our budget to prepare better. And it wasn't because someone told me, hey, you need to plan. I was like, well, it makes sense. If the economy's doing this, this is going to affect the bottom line. If this is going to affect the bottom line, I know I have a $6 million budget that I have to manage. What cuts and what things can I do differently to put us in the best position once the rest of the story comes out? And when the rest of the story came out, I predicted about a 10% cut in my budget, and I was about right. And just being able to, and I was predicting that a year before it happened, just because patterns and trends tend to follow themselves. And like it wasn't, we weren't surprised with some of the modifications that we had to have for our school, just because I planted a seed to get people to think ahead, like start thinking ahead. We can't just live in this moment right here. We don't have to have the detailed plan for what everything is going to look like, but we have to at least be planning and thinking about it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So, what would you say your work-life balance is like?
That does not exist as a principle. I would say it's a blend and not a balance, because you can't not be a principal every single day of the year. There's not a day that goes by that I get an email or a phone call or a text, whether it's a staff member who's sick, a staff member who has a kid who's sick, and they're like, hey, Brian, I can't come in today. Or like, those things are always happening. I think, like I said, when I talked about always being on, that's kind of exactly what I meant, because people are looking for you to lead them when they don't have the answer. And they really do. And so I would call it more of a blend than a balance. I make sure that I do things personally for me. I'm in school right now, so it's a little bit different. So I'm committed to that, which takes up a good bit of my time. On top of building a new school, you know, I mean, when tractors and earth moving equipment are on properties, things get broke in the middle of the day on a Saturday to say, hey, we busted a power line. We found this. We found, like, those are the things that always happen. I find it a blend more than a balance. Because if I balance, then I'm going to say, this is going to be the thing I'm focusing on. I'm not going to focus on this thing. You can't do that in this seat. It's both, right? And so what I see is the joy of technology. People can always get a hold of me. And so what I try to do is I try to empower people to be able to make decisions without me holding their hand. That's something that's pretty important. But I think if it's something that's just my decision that solely rests on me, I look at the information that I have and then I make the best decision that's there in front of me. But as far as like the balance of my home life, I mean, I have a dog. My dog's pretty chill. She's sitting on my feet right now as we do this interview. And my children are all older now. And so I don't have younger children. And so it works a little bit easier for me because my kids they're in college, right? And so my kids take care of themselves. I don't have to take my kids to dance recital. I don't have to take my kids to the tutor. I don't have to do a lot of those things that I had to do when I was younger. And so the position that I'm in, just because of all the decisions that I made in my life, makes my job a lot easier. And so my job is a big part of the things that I do on my day-to-day.
What are some words of advice for people who want to go in this job? Like, what education do you need? How long does it take to advance to where you are? Is it stressful?
Things I would say, I mean, obviously, you have to have a master's degree. You have to have an administrator license. That is recognized by certain states, right? So as long as you have the certification, like through CDE, if you were staying in Colorado, then you'd be fine. If you were in another state, you'd have to make sure that you have a license that the state recognizes. Your master's degree is very important. Can't get into administration without that, which means you have to have a bachelor's degree in order to do that, because you can't get a master's without a bachelor's. From a perspective of pay, the advice that I would tell people, don't take this job if you're looking at the money, because this job, the rewards are more in the impact that you make to families and kids than your paycheck. It commits a lot of time and a lot of you, and you have to be willing to give it in order for it to go well. And I think that's probably, like, when you talk about the stress, I think that's where the intersection actually means. I think when people have a perception that they're going to be a 8 to 4, Monday through Friday, take time off, and nothing's going to bother them, I think when people have that perception of this position, that's where they're going to start meeting all their stress points.
Yeah. So
right?
You really need to be able to be flexible and say, anything could happen. They may call me on Saturday right after I get out of Burger King getting lunch, and I need to answer and take in know what's happening.
Exactly. I mean, you have to be able, like, this is, I don't see this as a job that you can kind of be committed to. It's one of those all-in positions, just because of how many people are depending on you. And so, like, when I think about the pay, like I said, I mean, I have a six-figure salary. I do well, and it's a great job. It's a great profession. As far as setting yourself up to retire and para, like all of those things are wonderful. But if it's not who you are,
Don't do
that's
it for
going
the
to be,
money.
yes, don't do it. Don't do it for the money. Don't do it for all of those things. Because it, for some people, it's harder for them. And I think that could be, like I said, that can be resolved if you understand your purpose. And so, like, that's the advice that I give the people is find your purpose and figure out what your why is before you think you want this job. And I think about when I was interviewing and going to different schools, sometimes schools find you. And I knew I was going to be the principal at that school when I walked in for the interview. And that's something that you have to pay attention to. And then for me, it was like I can't even explain like all of the things that fell in place for it to be exactly how it is. And I don't feel like I said, I mean, people consider this job to be stressful, but I don't feel like I work a day in my life because I truly love
Yeah.
what I do. It didn't matter whether I was the assistant principal at Aspen Creek, whether I was the assistant principal at Centennial, whether I was admitting at Boulder High, like it didn't matter where I was at. Being clear
This
about
is
your
what you
purpose.
want to do.
Yes. And so when you know what your purpose is always going to be one of those things that helps drive your performance. And it's also going to be the thing that keeps you from burning out. You know, people don't burn out because of everything they do. They burn out because they forget why they're doing it. You know, and I mean, we can use training, or we can use preparing for a test. We can use anything that would make it relevant to a person that's living that reality. If you understand your why, you can pretty much do anything if it means enough to you. And that's the thing that I've seen, whether I'm working with kids or adults. If a person understands what they want, why they want it, they will do anything it takes to get it. If you don't
Yeah.
know and you're like, oh, well, I got into teaching because I wanted to have my summers off. That's a terrible reason to get in the profession, right? Like if you took this seat because you thought that you could just sit in an office and you didn't want to teach, that's the wrong reason to get into this seat, right? I mean, and it's with any and everything. Like understand what your purpose is, right? Like my purpose is to be able to influence 900 kids to see something in themselves that they may have never seen. And I joke as I get my doctorate. Like there was a person who had asked me, they were like, well, hey, when you get your doctorate, are you going to go by Dr. Shaw? And I'm like, no, absolutely not. Like that's the last thing that I would do. But for my kids to be able to see a person like myself be able to go and continue to educate themselves and learn and earn the right to be called doctor that only 2% of people earn is something that some sixth grader, seventh grader, or eighth grader 3 years from now may see me and go, I can do that thing because Dr. Shaw or Mr. Shaw or Coach Shaw, or whatever they call me, told me I can do it, and he's actually living proof. I can see it. Like it's tangible, right? That's the thing that at least that makes me get out of bed. Like I said, it's not my paycheck. Like I couldn't tell you the difference in how much I get paid in my job. What I do know is I'm affecting kids positively. And that is the thing that makes all of it worth it. At the end of the day, regardless of the stress, regardless of the stress that I have, building a new school, doing this and going to school, all of them. And I used to I joke with my kids when I say, hey, I have my own children, but y'all are my kids. And when I look at you like my own child, I'd go to the end of the earth for you because it means that much to me. And so that's the thing at the end of the day that makes me, all of the other opposition and all those other things are things that are just kind of, that's to the side, move that out the way. I've got things to do.
Yeah.
And so, like, know your purpose is the thing that I would tell any person, whether they think they want to be a principal, even if they want to go into teaching, right? Because you interact with the young minds of the world every single day, and all it takes is one interaction that can either sell a kid or unsell a kid. And if you're unselling a kid for the love of learning and who they can become, if you unsell that, you're in the wrong profession. And that's my job. If you're doing those kinds of things, you won't be in my building very long.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, you won't. Like, you will not be in my building long because the dream is there. We just have to uncover it for kids.
Yeah. And you really need to be able to work towards uncovering it, not work towards burying it more.
Do not bury that dream of a child. Do not. Like, if you won't do the work to dig and get dirty and do all those kinds of things, it's not the right place for you. Because you think, like, 800 kids, 900 kids in our building, every one of those kids have an opportunity or a possibility of doing something in this world that can change history. And if every person approached that in that manner, the expectation for every child would be high. But you have to have those expectations yourself, right? And so for me, I think about all of the people that I've interacted with from the time I was a child until now. And there are adults that have impacted me positively, that have changed my trajectory. Those are the things that I have to do for kids. And if people aren't brought into that, we find out soon enough. Like I said, COVID's not a challenge. The economy's not a challenge. None of those things. We all live in that. Do not bury a child's dream.
Thank you so much for joining me today.